以上満足だ。
Hey there, this is a compilation of the first 10 episodes of my old series about Japanese video games, Import Gaming for the Win, from October of 2013 to March of 2014. Obviously they're quite old, so there's a significant quality gap between them and more recent videos, and there are also some bad forced humor and outdated gaming opinions in them, but I think they hold up well enough sort of as game recommendations for those looking. I've upscaled the resolution from their original 720p to look sharper and cleaned up and balanced audio just a tad, and I'm re-uploading these slight remasters for those who missed out the first time around or might want to rewatch but in better quality. And I think it's kind of fun to see how much this channel has progressed since then. Anyway, I hope you enjoy a little trip down memory lane and look forward to the new videos that will keep on coming. Gunner's Heaven, October 7th, 2013.
Welcome to Import Gaming for the Win, a series of short videos featuring games that never made it outside of Japan, or at the very least, never made it to the US of A. With this series, I hope to share my love of Japanese retro games and hopefully introduce some gems from across the Pacific to people who missed the chance to play them the first time around. Today I'll take a brief look at Gunner's Heaven, a run-and-gun shooting game developed by Mediavision and published by SCEI for the PlayStation 1. It was released way back in 1995 in Japan, a very early title in the system's large library of games. While Gunner's Heaven did manage to secure a PAL release under the name Rapid Reload, it never saw the light of day in North America, most likely due to the oddly anti-2D game stance that Sony Computer Entertainment America had at the time in regards to licensing games for the PS1. Anyway, about the game, it's a really fun, colorful, and challenging shooting game with minimal story and maximum action. It's pretty similar to the Metal Slug series or Gunstar Heroes, and in fact I remember years ago on online forums and auction sites that people mistakenly believed that this game was the sequel to the latter. It would be easy to make that mistake since Gunner's Heaven so liberally pays homage to the Genesis classic. In Gunner's Heaven there are 6 stages, and most are cleared by mowing down hordes of robots, mechas, and dog soldier guys, taking out a sub-boss or 2, and then defeating a level boss. In order to do this successfully, you must cycle through 4 different weapon types, choosing the best one for the situation at hand. There is a standard normal shot, a homing shot, a grand shot, and a fire shot. Each type has unlimited ammo, but is pretty weak unless supplemented by power-up items, which are dropped by certain enemies. These add to the player's power level, which results in a more powerful shot. However, the power level is constantly being drained, so you must keep collecting these items and maintain a power level above 0 in order to benefit from its effects. This creates a nice balance of forcing the player to cause as much destruction as possible, collecting power-ups, and moving along at a brisk pace in order to maintain the added bonuses from a powered-up weapon. Thankfully, the power level stops depleting during boss fights, so you won't have to worry about using a weakened weapon for a big fight. Well, usually anyway. Other gameplay mechanics include a slide, a wire shot, a boost item, a life item, and bombs. The slide is performed by pressing down on the D-pad and the jump button, and is an essential move to master in many cases. The wire shot, performed with the R2 button, is a nice option, but I found it was pretty useless for the most part. The boost item exponentially increases the attack and area of your shot for a brief period of time, and are only found on rare enemies at predetermined intervals. The life item replenishes a little bit of the player's HP and is also found at fixed parts of each stage. And finally, there are bombs, which for the most part are just that, but we'll talk more about them in depth in a minute. You get to choose from 2 protagonists to play as, the spiky-haired Axel Sonics or the tomboyish Ruka Hetfield. Aside from the obvious differences between them aesthetically, the big thing that sets them apart are their arsenals. The 4 basic types of shots remain the same, but the range, pattern, and animations, those are all different. For example, Axel's fire shot is a powerful burst of flame that travels across the entire screen with a slow rate of fire. But Ruka's fire shot is a straight up flamethrower with very limited range but able to deal massive damage at a constant rate. It is up to the player to determine which character's array of weapons suit his or her playstyle the most. One more thing that is different too are how bombs are deployed. Axel has a soul deleter, which is a standard bomb that hits everything on screen, whereas Ruka uses a force field, which has more limited range and destroys anything in her immediate vicinity. There is a story about finding a hidden stone called Valkyrie before a militant group calling itself Pumpkinhead does, as well as some bouts of dialogue before and after boss fights, but it's pretty inconsequential and not really interesting. A weird thing about this game is that there is spoken dialogue in the game, but it is set to off by default. Granted, the voice acting is not necessary or particularly well done, but I don't know why that would be the default setting. I really enjoy Gunner's Heaven, but there are some inevitable negative points to the game. Short length, some awkward sound bits, and a bit of unbalance with certain weapon types. I'm looking at you, homing shot. There is no memory card support at all for this game, which means that any playthrough will start at the beginning, much like most run and gun games that preceded it. No big deal, but it would have been nice to have a level select and the ability to save high scores. Thankfully, sub-bosses sort of act like checkpoints, so when you die, you return to the last defeated boss. And there are infinite continues, which makes sense as this was a game developed exclusively for the PlayStation, rather than a straight arcade port like most other shoot-'em-ups. In my opinion, the biggest letdown is that Gunner's Heaven is single player only. In a game like this, and especially when there are already 2 playable characters, you'd think co-op would have been a given. But whether it was due to budgetary reasons, deadlines from the publisher, or a lack of a firm understanding on the workings of the hardware by the development team at the time, sadly, Gunner's Heaven is a solo venture. One thing I'll just mention randomly is that I always thought that Axel looked a lot like Rudy from the RPG Wild Arms, with the spiky blue hair, headband, gun. Well, it turns out that it's not so much of a coincidence, as the developer, Mediavision, is also behind the Wild Arms series of games. And Wild Arms 1 was in fact the game that they worked on right after completing Gunner's Heaven. So, there you go. Fun fact. Anyway, if you like Gunstar Heroes or run and gun shooting games in general, Gunner's Heaven is a fine game to add to your collection. A few years ago, the game sold for pretty high prices at online auction sites, but at the time of this video, you can easily find a copy for under $20. Copies in Japan run from about $1 to $10, and if you have a Japanese PSN account on the PlayStation 3, Gunner's Heaven is available as a PS1 Classic download for 600 yen, or a little over $6 US. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please rate or leave a comment. Thanks for watching. This is Jimmy Hoppa. Take care.
Goemon New Age Shutsudou, October 28th, 2013. Ganbare Goemon is a long-running series of games from Konami that has appeared on many different systems, starting from the NES era. Only 3 of the games were released on home consoles in North America: The Legend of the Mystical Ninja for the Super Nintendo, Mystical Ninja Starring Goemon for the Nintendo 64, and Goemon's Great Adventure, also for the N64. However, in Japan, the Goemon library of games is much more expansive, boasting over 20 major titles, making it one of Konami's most prolific and successful intellectual properties. And in the span of all these releases, the setting, characters, and humorous tone of the games has remained more or less consistent, with gameplay deviating very little from its action platformer roots. The best way to sum up the Goemon series is fun, wacky, and oh so Japanese. Good times, good times. Sadly, there hasn't been a major Goemon title since 2005, and the future doesn't look too promising for the series. But interestingly enough, in the early 2000s, Konami did make an attempt to rejuvenate and reimagine its legendary IP with a futuristic makeover, which took place in the forms of Goemon Shin Seidai Shumei for the PS1 and Goemon New Age Shutsudou for the Game Boy Advance. I'll take a look at the latter in this video, which is essentially a stripped-down, reimagined port of the former. Gone is the whimsical and folky Edo-era Japan setting of the previous games, and in its stead are futuristic highways, metropolitan cities, and convenience stores. The characters all go through some major changes too,
most likely to appeal to the gaming demographics of the time, which translated to a generic, extreme, and spiky anime style that lacks any of the creativity or charm of its predecessors. Take the Kunoichi Yae for example. A serious, capable, long-haired female ninja wearing, gasp, clothing that actually covers her entire body. A first for female ninjas in Japanese pop culture. Well, in the new game she is replaced with Yui, a ditzy, ineffectual, hormone-driven girly girl clothed in what can only be described as what ninjas wear when they go out clubbing. Awful. Impact, the friendly giant robot that aids Goemon and his companions along their many journeys in combating more colossal foes, went from being a completely unique and stylish concoction made up of primitive technology to a bland machine that would be hard to distinguish from a line of any other giant mecha manga or games. And worst of all, Goemon's goofy, lovable sidekick Ibisumaru has been turned into this. No. No. Just no. Anyway, about the game itself, it's a decent 2D action-adventure game with a core of gameplay consisting of platforming action stages similar to its predecessors. However, unlike the older games, most of the stages aren't very memorable and are a bit overly long, linear, and repetitive. There are some fun platforming sections, though getting through them can be tricky at times due to the controls. While the older Goemon games had a nice fluid feel when moving and jumping, new Age Shutsudou suffers from stiff, almost robotic movement. Perhaps it's due to the tiny D-pad of the Game Boy Advance, but even using the analog stick on the GameCube controller, the movement still feels rigid. You can switch between Goemon and Ibisu on the fly, and both control the same except for differences with their attacks. Goemon's pipe attack hits fast, whereas Ibisu's hammer hits slow, but for more damage. Late in the game, it takes 2 hits from Goemon to take down most enemies, but Ibisu can accomplish this with a single hit. Which character is best to use depends on the situation, but to be honest, it really is best to use Ibisu more often than not because of the added power of her hammer. The major downside to this, however, is constantly having to listen to her voice. Her terribly shrill and annoying voice. You'll hear it every time you attack, every time you jump. It just does not stop. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.
Shut up!
Goemon New Age Shutsudou does mix up the gameplay a bit with swimming and shooting stages. There are 2 swimming stages in which you take control of the aforementioned Yui and are given 360-degree control, and 2 shooting stages playing as the characters Sasuke and Yoshitsune. These stages are pretty fun and are a nice change of pace from the standard platforming. Different levels of the game are accessed from an overworld map spread across 4 different areas, and any stage can be played multiple times after its initial completion. Aside from the action stages, there are town portions, which are a staple of the Goemon series. Here you can stay at an inn or buy food to recover health, stock up on defense items, talk to townsfolk, etc, etc. You can also save your progress at the end. Due to the abundance of health power-ups dropped by defeated foes, New Age Shutsudou is a cakewalk for the most part, and your biggest enemies in the game are falling to death and running out of time for a stage. Oh yes, there is a time limit in the game, which can be extended with clock items scattered throughout the level. I don't really know why there's a time limit, as it's completely unnecessary, but if I had to guess, it would be to add some artificial challenge to the game. As I mentioned before, action stages tend to be pretty long, and the strict time limit forces you to run through the stage as fast as possible. It makes the game feel very gamey. And speaking of gamey, you also have a limited number of lives, and once you run out of them, it's game over, resetting any collected power-ups and money to default. It's frustrating, unnecessary, and really adds nothing positive to the game experience. Next, I'll mention different types of boss battles. There's one type in which you control Goemon or Ibisu in a controlled arena, the normal fare, and another where you take control of the giant robot Impact in a first-person view, much like other titles in the Ganbare Goemon series. The normal boss battles can be difficult, but are made much easier with armor and rice balls, which are purchased in towns. With these, you can take enough hits to just repeatedly whack your opponents in his or her face until you win. The Impact boss battles, in contrast, are challenging and actually require some strategy to complete. Impact fights made a nice transition to the GBA and capture the look and feel of their console counterparts pretty well. The only problem is that for all the effort put into the Impact sections, there are only 2 in the entire game. One in the beginning and one in the middle. The final stage ends with 2 boss fights in a row, which are just standard uninspired boss fights. It would have made sense to include one last impact battle for the finale, but I guess the developers just got lazy or had no time to include it. Either way, it's a disappointing, wasted opportunity. Last, I'll mention the graphics. As you can see from the videos, Goemon New Age Shutsudou is not a bad looking game by any means, but it's also not very appealing either. The impact boss fight sections look pretty good for a Game Boy Advance game, and I like the look of the town sections, but the rest of the game's visuals are just okay. You might think that it was just because it was released relatively early in the GBA's life cycle, but other games that came out before it, such as Golden Sun, Tactics Ogre, The Knight of Lotus, and another Konami game, Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, had far superior graphics, both technically and artistically. Graphics don't make a game for sure, but they certainly can add to the overall experience of a game. And comparing the aesthetics of this game with those of, say, Legend of the Mystical Ninja, which was released 10 years before it, it's hard not to feel let down by the lack of polish and effort put into the visuals. Overall, Goemon New Age Shutsudou is an interesting, albeit disappointing entry in the Ganbare Goemon franchise. The gameplay is dumbed down, the new futuristic setting is not utilized well at all, and it lacks much of the charm that defines the series. But as a portable action platforming game, it's not bad at all, and despite all the game's limitations and flaws, there's still a lot of fun to be had. It's a pretty hard to find game these days, so if you're into game collecting and see this game, pick it up. Anyway, thanks for watching and please rate or comment, and please check out my channel for future videos in the series.
Lack of Love, November 9th, 2013.
There are some rare experiments in gaming that can only come about with the right timing, right people, and right alignment of the stars. L.O.L is one example of this sentiment. No, not that L.O.L. No, not that L.O.L either. No, definitely not that L.O.L. Ah yes, that's the one. Sorry, I had to get that out of the way. This L.O.L, which stands for Lack of Love, is one of the more obscure and unique releases of the Sega Dreamcast's tragically short life. And that's saying a lot, since the Dreamcast was the home to so many games that pushed the boundaries of creativity for console gaming. Games like Jet Set Radio, Phantasy Star Online, Shenmue, Space Channel 5, Seaman, to name just a few. Anyway, Lack of Love is the brainchild of game designer Kenichi Nishi and world-renowned musician and composer Ryuichi Sakamoto, both of whom met almost completely by chance. The two quickly struck up a friendship, and eventually the topic of the Gaia hypothesis came up in their many conversations. I'm no scientist, nor am I a pseudoscientist, but to my understanding, Gaia hypothesis maintains that living creatures in the planet work in tandem to regulate the conditions for life on Earth, particularly through the process of symbiosis and coevolution. Sakamoto proposed making a game based on this idea, and so began work on Lack of Love. Published in 2000 by ASCII and released only in Japan, Nishi directed the game and his Lovedelic studio handled game development, whereas Sakamoto provided music and pitched ideas for the project. The final product is a brilliant game that is hard to define or categorize. The back of the box labels it as role-playing, but that's very misleading. It's more like an evolutionary adventure/puzzle game. The entire design of L.O.L is minimalist and somewhat cryptic in regards to both its presentation and gameplay. The instruction manual sets up the story, describing the Lack of Love project, a plan created by human beings to search for other planets in order to migrate to and populate. The opening cinematic introduces us to Halumi, one of the robots sent out into space to accomplish this mission, who has just found a suitable planet and prepares to land to fulfill his duties. At first, it seems like Halumi and his mission will be the main focus of the game, and we as the player are glad that the friendly-looking robot has had a successful journey, But our attitude quickly changes when the darker implications of his mission become apparent, as hundreds of robotic machines emerge from Harumi's ship in order to acclimate the environment to accept the human population. After the introduction, our protagonist, an odd creature native to the alien planet, is born and the game begins. Lack of Love throws the player out into the game with no real direction. Only the analog stick and 4 face buttons are used. Movement is obviously handled with the analog stick, and pressing A causes the player to either attack, eat, or bark. The X button executes an audible greeting, the B button makes the character fall asleep, and the Y button is used to pee. Digital urine on your Dreamcast. The instruction manual states the goal of the game is just to continue living, and for the most part that is exactly what you do throughout the entirety of L.O.L. Your character has life points as indicated by the green sphere at the top left corner of the screen, as well as a hunger meter represented by moving rings around the life meter. Life points regenerate over time as long as the hunger meter is not depleted. Go hungry and you slowly lose life points until you die. To prevent your hunger meter from draining, and in turn maintain your life points, you must seek out and eat food in the forms of vegetation and in most cases, other animals. But all that is just small potatoes compared to what the bulk of the gameplay revolves around, which is evolution, or more scientifically speaking, metamorphosis. But again, I'm no scientist, and on that note, neither were the creators of Pokemon. Anyway, in order to survive and ultimately progress through the game, you must evolve into increasingly more powerful and larger creatures that can adapt to the environment. This is achieved by befriending or forming a bond with other species of animals, often showing your lack of love. Doing this nets the player Cosmo Balls, which are little energy orbs required for metamorphosis. Find some special crystals in the wilderness, and if you have enough Cosmo Balls, you're encased in an egg and become the next step in the evolutionary chain. This sounds pretty basic and easy, but it can be quite challenging due to the minimalistic approach to the game design. Lack of Love doesn't hold the player's hand and instead forces you to pay attention to subtle audio-visual clues pertaining to the different creatures in your surroundings. Sometimes this process can be pretty easy and apparent, such as defending a creature being attacked by other animals or reuniting lost members of the same species. But for the most part, it's not so clear on how to befriend these creatures. One example of this is when you encounter a certain organism with large ears. If you encounter it at night, you'll notice that small and noisy bugs gather near its ears, preventing it from sleeping properly. If you pee somewhere nearby, the bugs will presumably be attracted to that scent and leave the creature alone. The animal will show its gratitude for your help by giving you a Cosmo Ball. One more option you have in finding a solution to these puzzles lies in the name of the animals, which are oftentimes hints on how to befriend or make contact with them. One of the first animals you'll encounter is a small green creature caught in the rain. If you check your menu, you'll see it is called an amegirai. Ame in Japanese means rain, and kirai means dislike, so you can put together that these little guys dislike the rain. Attack one of the nearby umbrella-shaped plants and it will provide cover, and the amegirai creatures will huddle under it, rewarding you with a Cosmo Ball. A majority of the game revolves around the player wandering the landscape, meeting new life forms and evolving, but there are a few interesting set pieces that change things up a bit. At one point you are captured by scorpion ant-like creatures and need to escape from their nest. Some of the sights in this section can be pretty terrifying and really makes you feel as though you're in danger, driving your desire to escape. At another point late in the game, you're captured by Harumi and put through a series of tests to measure your intelligence. Prove yourself and pass these tests and you'll become a welcome guest aboard the ship, separated from those animals who did not fare as well. Alternately, if you fail any one of these tests, the consequence leads to a truly horrific scene that will keep you on the edge of your seat, anxiously awaiting its conclusion. There are other games that come to mind that are very minimalist and evoke strong emotions from the player, such as Shadow of the Colossus and the downloadable title Journey. However, Lack of Love accomplishes the rare feat in gaming, fulfilling this without the use of dialogue or human characters whatsoever. When I passed the test and received preferential treatment from Harumi, I genuinely felt guilty about the situation. This was heightened even further because I had previously witnessed the fate of other creatures that were unable to attain the same elite status when I failed one of the tests. Experiencing these things firsthand as a player character, whom I spent hours with traversing and surviving a hostile landscape, made these moments much more powerful emotionally than if I had been controlling a human character witnessing everything from a distance. While playing the game, I thought about environmental concerns, animal cruelty, animal testing and captivity, the gap between the elite and the masses, and the titular lack of love that we as human beings have when it comes to such issues, as well as the feeling of loneliness and isolation that a lack of love brings. And for all the weight of the game's message, Not once did I roll my eyes, nor feel that I was being overly proselytized to. Final Fantasy VII. The greatest strength of L.O.L is that it effectively communicates its message while being engaging and enjoyable. And I would go so far as to call this a fine example of an activist game. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the musical and art direction of Lack of Love. Ryuichi Sakamoto composed all the spectacular music for the game, but use of his soundtrack is actually quite sparse. A majority of the game's audio consists of ambient noises and sounds from the player character and other creatures. When one of the game's musical pieces does kick in, however, it is used to great effect and enhances the mood of the scene perfectly. Visually, the look of the creatures and environments are fantastic, distinctly alien, yet familiar at the same time, somewhat similar to the designs found in the movie Avatar. Lack of Love is one of the best titles I've played for the Dreamcast, and is absolutely worth playing at least once. When it was first released, its style, design, and message was one of a kind and still holds up very well today. Copies are a bit pricey at the time of this video, with used copies going for over $60. I happened to be extremely lucky and found the game new for $5 due to a local game store going out of business. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please rate and comment and check out my channel for other videos like this.
Earth Defense Force 2, November 20th, 2013.
Some action games are stylish, and some action games are brutal. Some action games are colorful and fantastic, and some are atmospheric and creepy. Some action games test your skills to the max, and others seem made to piss you off. But then there are also some action games that are dumb. Just plain dumb. The Chikyu Boygun 2 is a dumb action game, but that doesn't make it bad. On the contrary, it's badass. Like Bruce Campbell badass. Just like with movies, at times us gamers need to take a break from more intelligent, thought-provoking media and shut off our brains with some dumb, badass action. The Chikyu Boygun 2 is the kind of game you wind down to after a long day, kill hundreds of things, and blow up stuff without the need to stress more than a single brain cell. The game was released in Japan in 2005, developed by Sandlot and published by D3 Publisher. It is volume 81, yes 81, in D3 Publisher's prolific Simple Series 2000 line of budget games, named so because each title in the series retails for 2,000 yen minus tax, which amounts to about $20 US. Translated into English, Chikyu Boygun 2 is Earth Defense Force 2, so I'll use that to refer to the game from this point on. It never came to North America, but saw a European release under the name Global Defense Force. In fact, several Simple Series 2000 titles were published by D3 in Europe under the Essential Games designation. This game takes place in 2019, 2 years after Earth Defense Forces repelled an alien invasion that caused mass mayhem across the globe. The recovery efforts have progressed at an alarmingly fast rate, and order is restored across the world. The EDF, which suffered many losses from the previous conflict, has been rebuilt. Humanity has enjoyed 2 years of peace, but suddenly the alien invaders appear once again, deep from the Earth and from vast distances across space. Earth Defense Force 2 puts you in the role of one of two characters, a normal EDF ground trooper, or Pale Wing, an elite unit that takes advantage of alien technology cultivated from the previous invasion. Each character can equip 2 different weapons at a time and have unique skill sets, which have their advantages and disadvantages. The EDF foot soldier is pretty agile, can jump high, and has a nifty dodge roll that is an essential part of his playstyle. He can also commandeer vehicles, but they're pretty useless and only worth using as a means of escape. Pale Wing, by comparison, is slow, does a pathetic little hop, cannot roll, cannot dodge, and cannot use vehicles. She makes this all up though with a sweet jetpack that makes her extremely mobile and deadly in the air. The ground trooper uses standard human artillery, machine guns, shotguns, rocket launchers, sniper rifles, and the like. Each weapon has infinite ammo, and pretty much any weapon can be used to complete any level. However, some weapons are better to use depending on the situation, and choosing the best ones means considering a variety of different factors, such as damage per shot, rate of fire, and reload times. Sometimes you'll want something to shoot flying objects from afar, and other times you'll want something to mow everything down at close range.
I'd like to keep this handy for close encounters.
I heard that.
Palewing's arsenal consists of optic, energy-based weapons, some of which resemble conventional arms, but many which truly feel alien and experimental. Ammo is also infinite, but reloading as well as use of the jetpack deplete Palewing's energy meter, which gradually replenishes over a short period of time. It is important to keep an eye on the energy meter, because if you run out of energy completely, you're often left helpless while waiting for the meter to fill up again. The default controls use a very dated, impractical control scheme that ignores use of the right stick entirely. Thankfully, you can switch over to a technical control scheme, which is pretty much the standard way shooting games are played these days, utilizing the left stick to move, the right stick to aim, and the shoulder buttons for everything else. This is really the only way to play the game in my opinion. Using the Ground Trooper is fun and has a standard run and gun arcade game feel to it, fast, frantic, and at times a bit generic. Playing as Palewing, however, is a completely different experience, flying around and using some truly magnificent weaponry to crush your foes. There are 71 missions and 5 initial difficulty levels that are shared between both character types. The goal of nearly every mission is to simply kill everything on the map. At times this is kind of annoying because there may be a straggler or two that wandered off away from the action, but thanks to a mini-map, you'll be able to find these guys with ease. The enemies, levels, and set pieces are inspired from a variety of popular sci-fi. You've got giant bugs attacking the city, robot invaders reminiscent of those found in War of the Worlds, some Godzilla ripoffs, and a giant city block destroying mothership like the one found in Independence Day. If you've ever dreamed about shooting Godzilla in the nuts point blank with a shotgun while also being attacked by 3 giant spiders, 3 giant ants, and a giant spaceship, well, this is the game for you. See? Dreams do come true. Finishing a level will reward you with a medal depending on which difficulty and character you completed it with. If you complete all levels of all difficulties with both players, a final difficulty setting, Impossible Mode, is unlocked. Difficulty does not stack, so this process is incredibly time consuming and only for the truly dedicated EDF2 players. Also, while the 5 standard levels of difficulty are available from the start, it is only really feasible to start off on the normal or easy difficulties and work your way up little by little. Enemy health, damage, and aggressiveness are increased exponentially with each mode, and it is basically impossible to complete anything above normal from the start. Thankfully, you'll be able to tackle the harder difficulties over time by increasing your character's health and collecting new, more powerful weapons. Killing an enemy will sometimes drop one of 4 things: a small first aid kit, a large first aid kit, armor, or a weapon box. The first aid kits restore health during a stage, the armor will add 1 point to the player's maximum hit points, and the weapon box adds 1 random weapon to your arsenal. Weapon finds become progressively better as you advance through missions and take on higher difficulties. Additionally, EDF2 supports 2-player couch co-op, and for the most part makes level completion much easier. Unfortunately, each player's field of vision is hampered significantly by the vertical split screen. Earth Defense Force 2 sports some low-res textures that recall memories of the N64 era, in-game objects often have low polygon counts, and there are other weird technical glitches here and there. But despite those things, I think this game looks great, mainly due to its grand scale. It's amazing that Sandlot was able to put a game like this on the PlayStation 2, and with such a small budget at that. Everything is huge, and at times there's so many things moving on screen it truly feels chaotic. Sure, at certain points there is some massive slowdown, but more often than not the frame rate remains pretty stable, even during some of the more hectic battles. Gameplay is simple and solid, and except for a few stages, never feels too dull or monotonous. This game was also ported to the PSP in 2011, which was only published in Japan. EDF2's sequel was released for the Xbox 360 in 2006, and saw a release in North America the following year as Earth Defense Force 2017. Story-wise, it's a prequel and lacks many of the features of its predecessor. There is no Palewing, there are less missions and enemy types, and many of the same stages, music, and sound effects are recycled from EDF2. It's still a great game, however, and is definitely worth picking up. If you need to whet your appetite for dumb, badass action games, Earth Defense Force 2 is the game for you. Check it out! I hope you enjoyed the video. Please rate, leave a comment, and check out my channel for videos like this one. Thanks and take care.
Lightning Legend, December 4th, 2013.
Konami is one of the most beloved third-party game publishers of all time, creators of many popular series that would ultimately go on to define their genres. Action games wouldn't be the same today without Contra or Castlevania. Metal Gear paved the way for popular stealth games. Gradius is perhaps the most important shoot-'em-up ever made, and you can't mention the horror genre without mentioning Silent Hill. The publishing giant has gone on to make successful RPGs, sports games, and even dating sims, but one genre that almost no one associates Konami with is the fighting genre. When I heard that Konami created a fighting game, I knew I had to check it out.
Gas Fighters Next Dream.
Okay. Oh, this is kinda lame. Oh, bland graphics and stiff control. Wait, stop. What? Why is the camera doing that? Ah. Stop. Alright, no more. I guess it's time to go to video game hell. Yeek.
Game over.
That game is god-awful, but thankfully we're not here to talk about that one. This is the fighting game we're here to talk about. Lightning Legend Daigo no Daiboken, or Daigo's Great Adventure for the PlayStation 1. Released only in Japan right at the end of 1996, it's jam-packed with charm and humor, and also happens to be a fun, solid fighting game at the same time. Unlike many other fighting games for the PlayStation in that era, Lightning Legend was made from the ground up exclusively for the system and not ported over from the arcades. Set in the fictional Japan-esque country of Japone, the game initially provides you with 8 different characters to play as and 2 game modes, Story and Versus. I love the way the character select screen is designed, as it's much more clever and interesting than other fighting games. There's an option to change this to a quick select mode, but it's rather pointless since it doesn't really cut down on the time it takes to select a fighter, and only serves to make the selection screen more drab. Anyway, each character has his or her own story, which unfolds through 2D cutscenes in between fights. Since this game wasn't meant to be a quarter muncher, the story and dialogue between characters are fleshed out a bit more than your standard fighting game. In general, 3D graphics from the PS1 era have aged terribly, but somehow Lightning Legend still looks pretty good nearly 2 decades after its initial release. The graphics are colorful and bright, and the art style is very appealing. Animation is nice and fluid, and the character models are quite detailed, showing a lot of expression on their faces. Music in Lightning Legend is top-notch, pretty much what you'd expect from a Konami game. There are a lot of typical anime themes and tropes in the game. You've got your young boy hero out to save the world, the cute mascot character, a ninja superhero, a burning youth fighting for justice, some boob touch action, but no giant robots, sadly. To be honest, I don't really watch or care for anime, but I love the style of Lightning Legend. The cast of characters are all distinct and likable, the story is presented as parody, and nothing is ever taken too seriously. The fighting game system is pretty solid and easy to pick up and play due to its relatively simple control scheme. On default settings, the D-pad is used for movement and the 4 face buttons are used to execute light, medium, and heavy attacks, as well as a taunt. Special moves are performed by combining different inputs of the D-pad with one of the attack buttons, similar to Street Fighter. Holding down the heavy attack and taunt buttons at the same time charges a power meter that can be used for super attacks, and taunting will cause your opponent's power meter to decrease slightly. Pressing back on the D-pad makes your character block, but there's also an auto block feature that takes effect when there's no controller input. Finally, you can grab opponents by simultaneously taunting and moving right or left, and can parry attacks by pressing the light and medium attack buttons together. At first, controls feel a bit stiff and it may be hard to pull off some of the moves, but in no time you'll be stringing together combos and winning matches with ease. A nice little bonus that comes included with the game to help out are character cards that list all inputs for their special and super moves on the reverse side. There's a nice feeling of impact when attacks connect, but at times hit detection can feel a bit spotty or off, with attacks clearly hitting your opponent but to no effect. It's frustrating but nothing game-breaking. Balancing in the game is pretty good for the most part, but there are definitely some characters who are better than others. In particular, Adolf and Misa come to mind. Adolf is fast, powerful, has long combo strings, can shoot projectiles, and has 2 super moves when most of the cast only has 1. Clearly alpha. And Misa is, in my opinion, the best character in the game due to her awesome high damage special moves, speed, and dash attack. Her combos seem to connect more than any other character, and I barely ever lost a round using her, even on higher difficulty settings. But I guess this is not surprising, since in most fighting games, any character who graduated from the Mai Shiranui school of boob jiggle animations is usually a bit overpowered. They do it for the fans. Anyway, the driving force to continue playing Lightning Legend stems from item collection. After each round, you receive an item from your opponent, and what item you get depends on a variety of circumstances. You'll get different items for more obvious things like winning a round without taking damage, finishing with a super move, and victory by timeout. But some items require you to mix things up a bit, such as winning a round with only 1 second left on the clock and losing to an opponent without causing any damage whatsoever. Every character has 16 items to unlock, and the conditions to unlock these are the same for each one. You can view your collected items in the game records, and a majority of them unlock some kind of bonus, such as developer messages and extra costumes, but most are concept artwork of the various characters in the game. Collecting all items for the aforementioned Misa also unlocks a new alternative character for her twin sister Disa. Additionally, there are a few items that unlock based purely on chance, and these allow access to new modes. Obtaining a gold watch unlocks time attack mode, and finding a treasure box and a treasure key will unlock collection mode. Time attack is just that, an arcade mode with the purpose of clearing the game with the best time possible. And collection mode is a series of never-ending fights with any characters of your choice, making item collection much easier. But unfortunately, since obtaining the items to unlock these modes are random, you may have to play through story mode many times before you find them, which can be annoying. I beat the game with all characters, did several more playthroughs, and found 4 gold watches until I finally found a treasure chest and could unlock collection mode. Unlockables that aren't dependent on item collection are 4 new characters, 2 of which are added to the roster after your first story mode playthrough, and 2 more for completing the game a couple of times without the use of a continue, which can be made easier by setting rounds to 1. Unfortunately, they cannot be used in story mode, but are available for everything else, and have their own set of items to collect. Lightning Legend is a fun, well-designed fighting game with great presentation, an interesting world and characters, and a lot of replayability and extra content. This was such a good first attempt at a new fighting game series that it's really a shame that it never saw a sequel, spin-off, or anything else related to the IP. You can tell the creators really put a lot of care and effort into the game, and I would have loved to have seen what else they could have done with the series. But anyway, if you're looking for a good fighting game experience on the PlayStation 1, I highly recommend checking out Lightning Legend. You should have no trouble picking it up, since it sells for pretty cheap and is not all that uncommon. Anyway, thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and please check out my channel for more videos like this one.
Violinist of Hameln, December 14th, 2013.
In the West, Enix is probably most well known as the publisher of many popular role-playing games, such as Star Ocean, Illusion of Gaia, and perhaps the king of JRPGs, Dragon Quest. But in Japan, the company has had a long history of dabbling in other industries outside of gaming, and one example of this is Gangan Comics, which publishes manga. One of their serial publications, Monthly Shonen Gangan, began running a musically themed fantasy adventure series called Violinist of Hameln in 1991. And as its popularity began to rise, the decision was made to bring the comic into the world of video games. Released in 1995 for the Super Famicom, Violinist of Hameln, or Hameru no Violin Hiki as it's known in Japan, is a 2D side-scrolling action-adventure game done in the same colorful style of Capcom's Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse, Konami's Rocket Knight Adventures, and Accolade's Bubsy and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Haha, just kidding about that last one. Anyway, you play as Hamel, a selfish, jerky hero of legend, and are accompanied by a talking crow named Oboe, and Flute, a young, kind girl who Hamel meets at the onset of our adventure. The 3 of them are traveling north to defeat an evil army of monsters unleashed upon the world years ago, who now reside in Hamelin, where they have established their capital. The game is divided up into 4 chapters, called movements here since it's a musically themed game, and each is made up of a town, several action stages, and a boss battle. In town, you can talk to villagers and use coins to recover health or buy items that will aid you on your quest. You can play any level over again after its completion, which is useful for collecting coins and power-ups, but only for the chapter you're currently playing and before defeating the boss. Hamel does combat not with swords nor other conventional weaponry, but by playing music with a special oversized violin. By finding musical notes scattered about certain levels, the power of his attack can be increased up to 3 times. But if you happen to lose a life, these effects are lost as well. Other moves at his disposal are a jump, a crouch, and the ability to pick up and throw objects. There are also a couple of secret moves, revealed after the end credits. Extra lives are gained with 1-up items, health can be recovered by collecting fruits, and maximum health is increased by acquiring a large heart item. Pretty standard stuff for a platforming game, but what sets Violinist of Hameln apart from other similar games is its partner game mechanic. Flute will always trail Hamel wherever he goes, and is mostly controlled by the game's AI. By pressing the X button, however, you can command her to either follow you or stop and wait where she is. She is set to follow you when the word call flashes in front of oboe, and when the word isn't there, it means the current command is set to wait. Flute is there to help Hamel progress through each stage, but how you treat her and the way in which her help is utilized in this game is enough to make certain so-called feminists' heads explode. Along your journey, you'll find a variety of different dolls that you can force Flute to wear as a mascot costume. There are 16 in total, and most are used to progress through the game somehow, often by jumping on poor Flute's head. For example, the first doll you find is that of an ostrich, which allows you to cross over spiked areas. Just look at her face, she is not amused. Later, you'll find costumes that allow you to traverse water, and others that let you fly. It's great that there's such a variety of costumes to use, but some are only used once or twice, and others are made nearly obsolete with later pickups. In order to switch costumes, you must hit start to bring up a menu and then return to the game. Sometimes it feels a little tedious having to go back and forth between the pause menu and the game, but it's no big deal, and after a while you won't really even notice it. In addition to helping you move around the various stages, Flute can be turned into items used to attack enemies. You can turn her into a frisbee and throw her in the air, transform her into a deadly bomb and obliterate everything on screen, or toss her around as a curling stone and watch her bounce around the level sporadically. Pretty sadistic stuff. Often, you just pick her up normally and chuck her at walls and enemies, and in fact this is encouraged since it earns you money. This game literally forces you to objectify women and exploit them for cash. So there you have it, Violinist of Hameln for the Super Famicom. Most sexist game ever made. But all joking aside, the costume system is a lot of fun to use, and at times makes some levels seem almost like puzzles. Flute is invincible, but has a health meter that, when drained, will sometimes cause her to lose coins when hit, and boy will she get hit over and over again. But thankfully, there is a wallet item you can buy early on that prevents the loss of money. As Violinist of Hameln draws heavy influence from music, it only makes sense that the soundtrack would be fantastic. The game's OST contains some of the best music on the Super Famicom in my opinion, which is a nice mix of 16-bit renditions of classical music. This is a truly great game, but like all games, it's not without its flaws, minor as they may be. Flute does a pretty good job of sticking close to Hamel in each stage, but once in a while she'll get stuck somewhere and you'll have to wrestle with the controls a bit to get her to catch up. The game's length is also a tad bit on the short side, and I estimate most people could complete the game in under 4 hours on their first playthrough. Violinist of Hameln utilizes neither a save nor password system and must be completed in one sitting. Finally, the game is relatively easy, and I didn't have much trouble getting through it except for a few sections. However, I will say that the second chapter boss in particular seems extremely difficult when compared to the other bosses, and the game as a whole. The game ends on a cliffhanger, and it's unfortunate that a sequel was never made. If you have a Super Famicom, or the ability to play Japanese games on your SNES, Violinist of Hameln should definitely be a part of your gaming library. It is a bit hard to find, and a complete copy of the game can be more expensive than most of the other Super Famicom games, but it's well worth hunting down. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please rate and comment, and check out my channel for more videos like this one.
Nekketsu Oyako, January 4th, 2014.
The Sony PlayStation forever changed the world of gaming when it debuted in Japan on December 3rd of 1994. At launch, there were a total of 8 games available, and one of these titles was Nekketsu Oyako, also known as Hot-Blooded Family, from the now defunct game developer Technosoft. The game is a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up similar to heavy hitters of the genre, like Capcom's Final Fight or Sega's Streets of Rage 2. So similar, in fact, you might have a hard time telling Nekketsu Oyako apart from its competitors. Much like another early PlayStation release I already talked about in this video series. Anyway, the premise for the game is about as paper thin as you'd expect for a beat 'em up. In order to finish construction of a super secret super weapon, a shady criminal organization called Big Black has abducted former Nobel Prize winning scientist and full-time housewife Sayako Hibino. It's up to her 3 would-be saviors to blaze a trail of destruction through the streets of Tokyo, bust the skulls of hundreds of faceless thugs and furry fantasies, and break into Big Black's headquarters to save her. You know, what is it with this genre and people getting kidnapped all the time anyway? The 3 protagonists play like your standard cast of beat-em-up heroes, and as the title of the game suggests, are part of the same family. There's the strong and burly Dando Hibino, husband of the kidnapped Sayako and former professional wrestler, much like Mike Hager of Final Fight fame. Heck, they even look the same with their buff alpha male physiques, working man fashion senses, and hardcore mustachioed no-nonsense expressions. Nando moves slowly, but his attacks pack quite the literal punch, as he has the highest power rating of the 3. Dio is the daughter of Dando and Sayako and uses a giant croquet mallet as a weapon. Even though she looks like she's straight out of the Morning Musume subgroup Minimoni, apparently she was trained by her father from a young age in the art of grappling, so she can hold her own in a fight against street toughs. While her attacks are pretty weak, she makes this up by having the highest speed rating in the game. And rounding out the character selection is Tora, who, while not actually a blood relative, works for Sayako as a lab assistant and mooches off the Hibino family like a real family member would. He has the most balanced stats in the game and fights using a mix of punches and kicks with a lightsaber type weapon. I think Tora looks a lot like an Asian version of Terry Bogard from Fatal Fury, except with more too, since he wears his hat backwards. Oh yeah. The game uses a simple control setup that should be familiar to anyone who's ever played a beat 'em up game before. The D-pad moves your character in 8 directions, the X button is used to jump, and the square button is used to attack. Pressing X twice allows you to double jump, and multiple attacks can be stringed together into combos. Coming into close contact with foes will cause you to grapple onto them, and from there you can execute a throw or continue to pummel into your opponent. If you ever get surrounded by too many enemies, you can press the circle button to perform a super move to clear your surroundings and deal massive damage to the baddies, but in typical beat 'em up fashion, using this move also causes damage to the player character. Pressing R1 or double tapping the D-pad either right or left causes the player to dash, and a special attack can be done by making a sweeping down left or down right motion followed by an attack, so basically performing the Hadouken move. Each character can also pick up weapons such as bombs, throwing knives, and a throwing disc that functions like a boomerang. There's a rifle and submachine gun that can only be used by Dio and Tora, and a bazooka that only Dando can wield. It's not necessary to use these weapons, but makes fighting much easier, for the most part. There are also healing items in the form of food, and trinkets and money bags which increase score. A nice feature of the game is that picking up extra food items allows you to increase health up to a maximum of 200%. No need to let that piece of sushi you just found sitting in an oil drum go to waste after all. Yum! In total there are 5 stages, each with a variety of different and colorful locales. There are your standard street levels, an amusement park, a sky garden, and the obligatory tower style final stage where you fight all of the previous bosses again. The sprite-based graphics look great for the most part, everything runs smoothly without any slowdown, character and enemy animations are well done, and at times there's a really impressive number of enemies on screen. Some of the environments, however, seem pretty flat and don't really succeed at giving the sense of scale that the game would hope to deliver. Nekketsu Oyako is pretty obscure as far as beat-em-ups and PlayStation 1 games go, but the level it seems to be most known for is the second one, which takes place inside and on top of a huge whale that swallows you up for no apparent reason at the end of stage 1. As you can see, the game has a strange sense of humor, which is something that sets it apart from the games it so closely replicates. The common thugs you beat up on all wear boxing gloves, and so do giant octopus enemies in the whale stage. One of the healing items you find is a can of beer, which Rando can pick up just fine, but try to pick it up with one of the younger characters and you get this. So in this game world, teens get a pass to use guns, explosives, and other means to murder and assault tons of people with no consequence, but underage drinking, unthinkable. And finally, when you defeat the gun-wielding final boss of this game, When you defeat the final gun-wielding boss of this game, the fight isn't over as he tears off the roof of the place and turns into a bizarre cape-wearing supervillain. WTF. Nekketsu Oyako is a fun beat-em-up game that clocks in at about 1 hour on normal mode, which is short but just about right for the genre. The game can be relatively easy since each character's special move is a bit overpowered, but thankfully there are 4 different levels of difficulty you can choose from if you want to up the challenge. The game can also be played cooperatively with another player. Despite Nekketsu Oyako being a launch title for the system, there are surprisingly very few beat-em-up style games on the PS1. A year after its release on the PlayStation, it was ported over to the Sega Saturn. The only differences in the port I hear are a few graphical changes and some slowdown. Not a deal breaker by any means, so whatever version, check out Nekketsu Oyako if you love beat-em-ups. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I would really appreciate that you rate, comment, and subscribe if you did. And please check out my channel for more videos like this one. Thanks a lot.
Kyuutenkai, January 20th, 2014.
One of the oldest forms of arcade games, the pinball machine has seen a steady decline in popularity following the golden age of the arcade of the 1980s. It's getting harder and harder to find a physical machine these days, much less an actual arcade. Despite all that, however, the pinball experience has endured over the years, and a number of pinball simulations have been made for home computers, consoles, and even handhelds. The newest generation of gaming has only just begun, but pinball games are already being made for the latest consoles. One quality pinball video game that perhaps not too many people are familiar with is Kyuutenkai, a Japan-only 1995 release for the PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn from Technosoft. I own a copy of it for the Saturn, so I'll talk about that version for this video. Anyway, this game was published right after Technosoft completed Nekketsu Oyako, which I talked about in my last video, and in fact Kyuutenkai is advertised briefly in that game's startup sequence. The game is a lighthearted, 2D fantasy-themed pinball game with colorful graphics and a quirky cast of characters that truly is fantastic, as the cover so proudly proclaims, typo and all. 3 heroes have been called upon to fight in a pinball-esque world to prevent the resurrection of the devil, who was previously sealed away centuries ago by the ancestors of the protagonists. With this story setup, you'd expect the game to be structured into levels like Sonic Spinball for the Sega Genesis, or have adventure game elements like an epic quest mode, but no. The game takes place entirely on one long table, split up into 3 different sections: Heaven, Earth, and the Underworld. It's unfortunate that the game is limited to just this one table, but it's really well designed, the ball physics are pretty good, and there are tons of interesting things to accomplish on it. The 3 selectable characters all have a unique special skill and a theme song to set them apart. There is the swordsman, Sword Shield. Yes, that really is his name, whose strike sword special skill increases damage by 3 times, making him the power character. The mage Yuki Tonae has a fire comet ability that will multiply score by 3, which makes her best suited for getting high scores. And then there's the newly born Dragon Man, Dragon Baby, Midoran, whose special ability, the Option Shell, creates a set of extra balls that trail the main one, multiplying both attack and score by 1.5, and thereby making him the most balanced choice of the 3. These special attacks are activated when certain conditions are met, and last for a very brief period of time. Control and gameplay are very basic in Kyuutenkai. First off, you have the option between a fast or slow ball. Pressing any direction on the D-pad controls the left flipper, pressing A, B, or C controls the right flipper, and pressing either of the shoulder buttons will nudge the game table in their respective direction. In my opinion, this setup can be problematic, since using your index or middle finger allows for faster reaction times than using your thumbs, something that is crucial when Twitch gameplay is involved. Sadly, there's no option to change controls, as I would have preferred that the shoulder buttons control the flippers and the face buttons to nudge the table, but I got used to it soon enough. Pressing any of the top row of face buttons brings up a menu, and from there you can turn off the BGM, check the scoreboard, and save your progress, which includes your scores and how many lives you have remaining. Saving is a nice feature, and if you're fast enough, you can save just before you die, because when you reload your file, you begin at the plunger rather than in the exact location you were previously. When you lose all of your lives, there's no option to restart the game and you're sent back to the title screen. This can be frustrating because of the somewhat long load times in Kyuutenkai. There are a lot of different characters scattered throughout the game world, and make things more humorous and intriguing than your standard pinball game. One example I'll bring up is the goddess in the Earth section, who will send you up to the Heaven section if you land in her hand. But smack her in the face a few times and she'll get pissed, and the next time she catches you, she'll shoot lasers out of her eyes, killing any enemies on screen. From there, she'll rearrange some bumpers and release you back into the Earth section. Anyway, the goal of the game is to defeat the 4 bosses that inhabit the game world so you can go on to fight the final battle. There's Succubus, who is trapped in a waterfall in the Heaven section, Usako, a strange girl in a bunny suit who is constantly climbing up the neck of a derp-faced dinosaur in the Earth section, and who also looks eerily similar to Nami from the KOU Gekitai series. Harpy, who resides in the underworld and looks like she should have been the Succubus character for obvious reasons. And finally, there's Satan, Lord of the Underworld, and basically Kid Dracula when he runs out of hair gel. You fight these bosses by getting 2 or more of their portraits to appear on the Earth section bumpers, which basically function as a slot machine. An entryway will open up near the boss, and from there, you must complete a mini-game using 1 ball and within a time limit to achieve victory. These boss fights are pretty fun and remind me a bit of the bonus rounds in the aforementioned Sonic Spinball. Harpy's stage involves you destroying all items in a small room within a short time limit, and to defeat Satan, you must score 4 soccer goals against him as he dons the role of goalie and dives sporadically around the net. I love how his cheerleaders pout when you score a point against him. This method of progression sounds good, but it's these slot machine bumpers where my only really big gripe with Kyuutenkai stems from. Since the conditions for unlocking boss challenges is essentially random, it can take a long time before you can partake in all of the battles. I was able to challenge and defeat Satan, Harpy, and Succubus relatively early on, so the only boss that remained was Usako. Well, after playing the game for several hours, defeating the other bosses time and time again, and in the process capping the high score, I finally got to challenge Usako, and then proceeded to fail miserably at her stage. I tried playing a few more times, but I couldn't get to her boss challenge again, so I was unable to face the final boss, who looks like a lot of fun, judging from the back of the game case. One more small thing that I took issue with in this game was how gaining extra balls are handled, which is also related to the slot machine bumpers. Normally in pinball, extra balls are gained with the score, and sometimes you get extra plays when you lose all your balls, but not in this game. Even maxing out the score gives you nothing. In order to get an extra life, you must get 3 crab enemy portraits to appear simultaneously in the Earth section, which only happened to me twice over the span of 5 hours. Well, that's Kyuutenkai. A great pinball game marred only by a few bad gameplay design choices. Maybe someday there'll be a great fantasy adventure RPG pinball hybrid, but in the meantime, the world of Kyuutenkai will have to do. The wackiness and charm of its characters and game table make it worth picking up even for people who aren't really big into pinball. As always, thank you for watching, and please leave a comment, rate, or subscribe if you enjoyed what you saw, and check out my channel for more videos like this one.
PuLiRuLa, February 16th, 2014.
In more recent decades, and especially with the advent of the internet, it seems contemporary Japan and Japanese popular culture have earned the reputation for being quirky, wacky, and more often than not, just plain weird, particularly to Western eyes. While all cultures have their oddities, there's no doubt that a unique strangeness has implanted itself in many aspects of the Japanese experience, sprinkled in between all the boring and sterile bits that aren't much different from the rest of the developed world. The realm of gaming is no stranger to this supposed Japanese weirdness, and to illustrate this point, take a look at some of the following strange games that were conceived in Japan. Pretty weird stuff, right? Well, prepare yourself for a game that may be the strangest I've ever played, the curiously named PuLiRuLa. The game is a simple arcade beat-em-up developed by Taito in 1991 that was ported over to the PlayStation and Saturn in 1997 by Xing Entertainment. It's part of a series of arcade ports the company published under the Arcade Gears label. I'll be taking a look at the PlayStation version here for this video. In the country of Radish Land, time behaves according to a network of gears and machines, controlled by a large wind-up key. One day, a bad guy named Jack steals that key and thereby stops the flow of time. Thankfully, two children, Zack and Mel, are in possession of magic wands created by their grandfather, and it's up to them to save their town and the rest of Radish Land from certain doom. The quest that unfolds is home to some of the most bizarre, random, and surreal images you'll ever find in a video game. I mean, just take a look at some of this stuff. What's with this large group of gaunt men who I can only assume are starving, surrounded by evil flowers? Why is there a random Heno Heno Mohiji doodle here on the wall? Here's a stage made up of MC Escher type backgrounds and other random stuff for absolutely no good reason at all. In the desert level, defeating the snail boss brings some heavy rain, flooding the area because time is frozen in the next town. Restore time there and all the rainwater rushes through town and sweeps you away, leading to a minigame where you have to repeatedly whack weird fishmen that jump around the water. And what the hell is this? But none of that compares to level 3, a place which is distorted by a man's crazy dreams. Here's the lovely imagery you're greeted with at the start of the stage. I'll let some of the sections of this level speak for themselves. And finally, what is in my opinion the strangest and most breathtaking oddity in the entire game. Big legs, and an entryway in between them. What mystery lies behind this doorway? Dare you open it to see for yourself? The build-up is killing me. Let's do this. What? Upon further inspection, you'll notice that the door leads to the vacuous domain of outer space. That opening between the legs houses the final frontier, where no man has gone before. The resting place of a pink elephant in his trunk, who pulls out the first moment he has a chance to. What does it mean? What does it mean? For answers, please contact Taito Corporation at Shinjuku East Side Square 2nd floor, 62730 Shinjuku, Shinjuku-ku, Tokyo 1608447, Japan. Attention, PuLiRuLa, what were you thinking with the legs and the door and the elephant? If you find the answer to this question, please let me know and you can win this wonderful limited edition box set of Find Your Love for the PSP featuring Daisakusen. In this special box, you'll find the PSP game software in addition to several photo prints of the lovely idol, a DVD movie album compatible with Region 2 DVD players, and a special Find Your Love image bikini for whom its intended wearer, judging by the targeted demographic of this style of game, is unbeknownst to all. But in all seriousness, despite the wackiness that PuLiRuLa is constantly throwing at you, at its core, the game is just a really basic, bare-bones beat-em-up. Controls are pretty standard. The D-pad controls movement, X is the jump button, and square is used to attack. There aren't any combos in this game, which makes no difference since most enemies in the game are defeated in a single hit anyway. When your foes die, they transform into little animals, which can be collected for points. There's also a magic attack performed by pressing the circle button. The attack executed is random and can be anything from a horde of animals that run across the screen to a guy that bundles up all enemies into yarn balls and tosses them into a microwave, in addition to others. In total, there are 6 levels and a final boss, and the game is over in less than a half an hour. And of course, the game supports co-op play, which is almost as fun as watching and listening to the reactions of any friend you coax into playing this game with you. As far as extras go, a small mini strategy guide of sorts is included with the game, published by Gamist. If you don't know Gamist, it's a company that put out some of the best video game magazine books in the 90s. Really high quality stuff for game fans and collectors, and I highly recommend picking up some of their publications. Anyway, there's a section in this booklet that goes over the secrets in the game, which are accessed in the options menu. By playing certain sound effects in a particular order, like you're entering a password, you'll unlock a variety of different things, such as stage select, free play mode, and the ability to change the size of character sprites. Changing the character size applies to enemies and NPCs as well, which makes it an amusing extra feature. Going with extra large characters crowds up the screen, whereas going extra small results in everything moving at a faster pace. It's worth playing with these settings at least once, as they change the gameplay dynamic quite a bit. Surprisingly, and against all odds, PuLiRuLa made its way outside of Japan, but only in the form of the original arcade version. Outside of the PS1 and Saturn ports, the game saw a later home conversion as a part of the Taito Memories Volume 1 compilation for the PlayStation 2 in Japan. This collection was released internationally as Taito Legends, but unfortunately, PuLiRuLa was taken out of the collection completely. So is PuLiRuLa worth picking up? Yeah, I think so. While the game is definitely on the short side, and gameplay is as basic as any beat-em-up can get, it's a lot of fun, and the graphics and animation are gorgeous, the music is catchy, and it can often be found for cheap. If you just want a weird game for your collection, you can't really go wrong with PuLiRuLa. The experience is brief, but the memories last a lifetime. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you'd like to see me talk more about some of the other weird games shown here, feel free to let me know in the comments section and maybe I'll do a future episode on them. Thanks for watching.
Purikura Daisakusen, March 8th, 2014.
1994 saw the release of Atlus's 2D fighting game Goemon Ichizoku 2 in the arcades, better known as Power Instinct 2 outside of Japan. Aside from being a solid fighting game, it's probably most notable for its humorous approach to the genre, especially compared to other popular fighters at the time, as well as its stellar soundtrack, which featured full-on vocal tracks in most of the stages. The Goemon Ichizoku 2 experience was eventually taken home in 1995, exclusively for the PlayStation 1 and only in Japan. Unfortunately, however, it was a poorly done port, with the game pausing to load for seconds at a time in the middle of matches when certain actions are performed. Anyway, the reason I bring this game up is because I want to talk about the most prominently featured character of the game, Kurara, who made her debut in this game and is basically a parody of the magical girl subgenre of Japanese animation. Think Magical Princess Minky Momo or Sailor Moon. Kurara has a magic wand that turns her opponents into animals and can transform herself into Super Kurara, a powered-up, sexy adult version of the teenage heroine. Apparently, this character became quite popular, so much so that she was given her own spin-off game, making her the Frasier to her Cheers. Take one good look at the character design and it's easy to see why she garnered such lavish attention. That headgear. This spin-off would be released in 1996 in arcades and the Sega Saturn, named Purikura Daisakusen. The title can translate to something akin to Princess Kurara, Grand Battle Plan, but the Purikura part of the title is a bit of a double entendre. Often in the Japanese language, longer words or phrases are abbreviated and made shorter, either to save time or to sound catchy. For example, the highly overrated holy mecca of Japanese gaming, Akihabara, is often shortened to Akiba. Princess Kurara, pronounced in Japanese, is Princess Kurara, and when abbreviated becomes Purikura. The phrase Purikura, however, is most commonly associated with Print Club, those awful photo booths that have become a staple of Japanese culture, where each year millions of teens and young people waste what equates to millions of dollars into them. These photo booths use super airbrush type filtering to supposedly make people look super cute, but to me personally, it makes people look super creepy and fake, especially the newer models that increase eye size. Ugh. But I guess I'm one to talk, since I too was guilty of partaking in these shenanigans in my younger days. Once or twice. Anyway, the double meaning is surely no coincidence, as both Atlus and Sega are responsible for the creation of these mechanized monstrosities. Now onto the actual game itself, which is a cute, colorful, isometric 3D action shooter that can be played with 1 or 2 players. Ah, the good old days, where developers used 3/4 perspectives that fooled the gaming public into thinking their games had actual 3-dimensional graphics. Oftentimes these games were notorious for their difficulty to control, such as Sonic 3D Blast, but Purikura Daisakusen plays surprisingly well and is a testament to the skill of the development team. I mean, it is Atlus after all. The Kurara from Goemon Ichizoku, it turns out, is on Earth participating in the fighting tournament for educational purposes, and is actually a royal princess who hails from a land above the clouds, the magical kingdom of Miracle World. She returns to her homeland to find that it has been taken over by the hostile Scrap Empire, which has kidnapped her older sister, Queen Urara, and turned the inhabitants of Miracle World into animals that work tirelessly for the Empire's ruler, Flash. All this destruction was wrought for possession of Miracle World's prized sacred stone, the magical orb, which can grant the wishes of any who take hold of it. Purikura Daisakusen takes place over 5 levels that throw hordes and hordes of enemies at you, each ending with a boss fight. The game plays much like some of the classic run-and-gun action games that preceded it, such as Mercs or Ikari Warriors, but with the isometric perspective. 3 unique characters are selectable: the titular Princess Kurara, her twin sister Kirara, and the Queen's boyfriend, Gray, who's been transformed into a giant overweight cat. The differences between each character lie in their attack animations, as well as movement speed and power, so you can choose a favorite based on your playstyle. For me personally, I think Kurara is the best choice. You also have the option to listen to the 3 heroes introduce themselves before starting the game to get a feel for who they are, learn about their hobbies, dreams, etc., and witness bits of sibling rivalry here and there. The arsenal at your disposal is made up of a projectile shot, a melee attack, bomb attacks, a short dash, and a familiar character who helps attack and can evolve into other more powerful forms. The projectile is the main attack of the game and is pretty pathetic starting off. However, there are red and blue power-ups scattered across Miracle World that respectively increase shot power and speed, making you into a one-man killing machine. Little girl or fat cat killing machine. Holding down the shot button will cause the character to continuously shoot in one direction, but with the added bonus of free movement. Dashing is used to evade enemy attacks, and can be performed with a double tap with the D-pad in any direction, or with the press of a button. Executing a melee attack while coming out of a dash will result in a more powerful attack. Bomb attacks change depending on which familiar is currently accompanying you, but often the attacks just damage pretty much everything on screen. Your familiar starts off as a walking egg, but can power up in between levels, depending on what kind of items you collect from defeated enemies. Killing foes with the standard shot will turn them into animals, and using a melee attack will turn them into jewels. You can also set off a chain reaction of explosions from baddies using the melee attack, which translates to more jewels and of better quality. At the end of each stage, the totals for animals and jewels collected are tallied up, and if a certain requirement is met for either, the next form of familiar is decided. If you reach the requirements for both jewels and animals, then the one you have more of will determine which familiar you get. There are many different types of familiars and progression branches, and each one has its own unique support attack. The familiar system is a nice side objective for this style of game, and gives it a bit more of a sim RPG element that you don't find often in run and guns. Finally, there are other power-ups that aid you on your quests, such as cakes to restore health, random trinkets to increase score, a 1-up item, and the Miracle Mirror. This mirror will transform Kurata into her Super Kurata persona, as seen in Goemon Ichizoku 2. Much like her sister, Kurata will become Super Kurata, and when playing as Grey, you revert back to his original form. While powered up, you become invulnerable, kill anything you touch, and shoot a projectile that can cause chain reactions with exploding enemies. But only for a very brief amount of time, of course. Since Purikura Daisakusen was an arcade game first, it's short like an arcade game, beatable in a little under a half an hour. The game is housed in a fat double CD jewel case, but comes with only one disc. The rest of the case contains a bonus 1997 desk calendar, most certainly a service for Kurata fans. Purikura Daisakusen can be quite challenging, but it's definitely beatable on default settings, especially if you're good at shooting games from the era. If the game proves too difficult though, you can increase the number of lives, bombs, and continues in the options menu. Other than the familiar system and the struggle to clear the game on one continue, there is replay value through multiple endings which change slightly depending on which character you beat the game with, as well as the familiar you have with you. Well, that's pretty much the gist of the game. It's fun, funny, pretty, and pretty damn good. If you're wondering whatever became of the Kurata character, well, the sequel to Power Instinct 2 was brought to the arcade and Sega Saturn in 1997, named Groove on Fight. However, since the game takes place 20 years after its predecessor, Kurata is not a playable character and in her stead is Popura, her daughter. Interesting that Atlus didn't go the Nina Williams route with their most popular fighting game character. Anyway, she did make a return to the series in 2003 with the long-awaited next entry, Power Instinct Mature Melee, and was a secret character in the 1996 3D Atlus fighting game Heaven's Gate. With Mature Melee, her name was officially changed to the westernized Clara. But since then, she's been a no-show, and with little hopes for a new Goemon Ichizoku game in the future, it seems that Kurata is just another character lost in the annals of gaming history. But hopefully not. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll continue to watch my series, comment, subscribe, and please follow me on Twitter for updates and other import game related riffraff. Well, until next time, the talk of magical girls is not over yet.
Hey again guys, thank you for watching. I know these are old videos with dodgy quality, so I appreciate you making it this far. If you'd like to do me a favor, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and maybe share the video with someone you think would also enjoy it. It really does help out. And if you'd like to support what I do and see the channel grow further, I hope you consider joining the Patreon or becoming a channel member. Thanks again, and I'll see you again soon with new videos.